Hello and welcome to the Disruptive Innovation Festival, the fifth day of the DIF, a 3-week online festival of ideas that asks the question, what if we could redesign everything? I am excited to introduce you to Jerry Michalski in this session, who will be hosting and facilitating an interesting presentation and a Q&A session about what if we trusted you. I'm really happy to be joined by you, Jerry. I know that you are a connector, a curator, a catalyst, and a systems thinker. So there's a couple of topics we can touch base on today. And I think one of the powerful statements to kind of introduce you with is, in this world, whom you trust and who trusts you are primary assets. So with this one, I'll hand over to Jerry, and please, to the audience, keep posting your questions in the chat box below in the session page.
Brilliant. Thank you so very much. I was really excited when I saw the DIF announcement that the theme for this year was, what if we could redesign everything? And as you'll see, that's sort of a path that I've been on for some time. In fact, the 3 themes for DIF 2017, 21st Century Economics, the Age of Automation, the Future of Design, all of them really fit the kinds of things that I'll be talking about here in the next half hour. So I will go for half hour, and then we'll flip to Q&A. First, a little bit of a poll, and I'm going to just imagine that we are all sitting in the same room, in an auditorium or a comfy conference room, and that I can see you, because I'd like you to raise your hand if you have ever consulted the Wikipedia. So raise your hand if you've consulted Wikipedia. I'm imagining that most of you are raising your hands right now. Raise your hand if you've ever edited the Wikipedia. I bet a lot of hands went down because it's a minority of people who actually make edits, but I bet there's still a bunch of hands up. Somebody who's either corrected a comma or added a paragraph or done something, contributed a picture to the Wikipedia. So raise your hand if you've ever attended an unconference or are familiar with a process called open space. Raise your hand if you've been in one of these self-organizing meetings. Raise your hand if you've ever made a microloan. There's a website called Kiva, and there are others where you can give, 20 pounds to somebody who's trying to buy a sewing machine or buy some books to sell or something else. Raise your hand if you've done that. Raise your hand if you've ever used open source software, if you've knowingly used an open source application of some sort. And then, and this is kind of a joke, but raise your hand if you've ever used the internet. I'm assuming all of us have, because we are right this moment. But in fact, that means you've already used open source software, because the internet is built in large measure from open source parts. And I'm using right now to do this webinar, I'm using the Chrome browser, which is open source. And there's a variety of elements of everything we're doing which are open source. So if you've raised your hand for any of these things, you've seen the answers that I'm going to point to. Now I have to explain the questions, like, why do these things matter? What do these things have in common? So let's go there. And first, I want to address the question of what needs redesigning and why. And here I'm going to overgeneralize. I just want to draw kind of a dramatic distinction. I see 2 camps for what needs redesigning in different ways. One camp of people think, hey, things are great. Things are actually doing pretty well. Look, the Dow Jones is at a record high. Bitcoin just crossed 7,000. Took a little dip the last couple of days, but economically things are great. But even behind that, it's more and more interesting. If you look at the statistics over the last 100 years, deaths are down, disease is down. We're conquering different kinds of disease. Poverty alleviation. China has raised 200 to 300 million people into the middle class. The largest movement, social movement that we know of in history. We have to admit things are actually getting better in different ways. And Steven Pinker would have us say that we're even less violent than we used to be. There are fewer people dying of wars than before. From this perspective, we'll just use technology to innovate fixes to the world's remaining problems, right? Because tech is helping us, tech works. And if you'll permit me to be a tiny bit cynical, poverty will just be a trouble ticket we'll submit to Zendesk, and then somebody will pick it up and fix it. In this worldview, kind of, to oversimplify, if we take some productive geeks, put them in startups and add some money, we might actually get progress and eventually some kind of singularity where things progress to the point where they're no longer recognizable, but they turn out pretty well. And if we break things, if we break this planet, we're already going to get off this rock, and we can settle. We can colonize Mars. We can lather, rinse, repeat in space colonies and some other kinds of places. Some people refer to this approach as the techno-utopian vision. I think that's not an unreasonable name for it. And many of my friends fall into this camp. And there are many people out there who are this optimistic about where we are and where things are going. There's another big camp that thinks that things actually suck. And there's plenty of reasons to think that things are sucking right now. I mean, there's the general loss of civility and fear of the other, which is being pumped by many people out in the world, creating what I call denial of discourse attacks. The 2008 global financial crisis almost broke the world financial system. In the US and other places, we're suffering from opioid epidemics that are killing more people than war does. We have mass shootings happening very regularly and can't seem to figure out anything to do about it. Many markets are actually captive markets that look like free markets. Many people live in economic traps. Poverty is a dismal trap. It's extremely hard to actually get out of poverty. And our technology is busy addicting us. We have robo-everything. In fact, not just robo-cars and robo-trucks, but software, I think, is going to lead into the great unemployment. I'm personally more on the things suck side. And I think we're heading into a moment where we're not going to be able to re-employ all the people we unemploy very quickly or very well. And a lot of forces will move them into precarious occupations where they can barely cover their rent or get enough food unless we change the social contracts. So we're suffering cyber attacks. We're living in the post-truth and fake news world. Across the world, the far right is winning elections all over the place. Some would argue that we're in a non-linear war. I recommend here Adam Curtis's documentary, The Hyper-Normalization, which will scare you if you aren't already. We're suffering from a trust implosion worldwide. In fact, global trust implosion was the headline of the Edelman Trust Barometer this January. Then I haven't even mentioned the Anthropocene, sort of the anthropogenic problems, like, we're overfishing, we're killing our oceans, we may create our own extinction level events. So some people are actually right in between these camps. They're worried about whether the cheese should go above or below the burger in the emoji, in the new emoji that have just come out, or they're watching cute cat videos or what have you. And there's a whole bunch of people sort of in between. There are also some wonderful people who are coming up with solutions to all these problems. Now, I said that I tilt more toward the things are actually broken and problematic camp, and I'll give you more details on why. But many great thinkers, some of whom have spoken at DIF, like Bill McDonough, who did Cradle to Cradle, David Bollier and Silke Helfrich, who are talking about commoning and the wealth of the commons, Charles Eisenstein's Sacred Economics, Jeffrey Sachs, doing a whole bunch of things, Kate Rayworth with Donut Economics. And then at what do we do about it? We have Otto Scharmer with Theory U, about a process that companies can go through. Juliet Shore talking about plenitude, open source. John Mackey and Raj Sisodia on conscious capitalism. The 2% solution on the far lower right. Let's tax a lot of transactions at 2% and use that money for good. And around all of this, there are multinational, transnational approaches toward the Sustainable Development Goals, the Gini coefficient of inequality, the triple bottom line, the balanced scorecard, and let's, of course, not forget the circular economy. So a lot of really smart people are proposing solutions for us. The fun thing about DIF is that it offers me an opportunity to give you my amateur theory, which really revolves around trust. So what do I mean? Let me tell you a story. This is a story I believe in. You may or may not believe in it, but I believe, for example, that long ago, and not in a planet far, far away, but rather on our own little rock, we used to live in community on the commons. We knew how to be in community, and we knew how to take care of the piece of land that we were on. And in fact, often we migrated a lot. We migrated with game, but we were smart. We were really intelligent about how to live on the land and how to take care of our community. Of course, there were moments where there were plenty of wars between tribes, or moments where we killed off our commons, which was kind of how we learned these lessons the hard way over time. But we knew what medicinal properties the things around us had. We planned ahead. I'm in the middle of reading a book by James Scott called Against the Grain, which is lovely, and goes back and looks across research in many, many disciplines to say, look, the people before brains civilized us, which is part of the controversy he's looking at, were actually very, very clever. Somewhere, somehow, somewhere along the line, we broke this. We started living as consumers, consuming natural resources. And that's the world we're in today. We long for community, and we've forgotten about the commons. Few of us, some of us who are probably leaning into this kind of a conference, are really interested in the commons. But in general, we live as consumers. And like, how did we get there? And some people think we lost faith in humans during World War I, because right before World War I, we have this incredible rush of innovation, electrification, cars, airplanes, radio, all sorts of things are being invented. And yet, we throw waves after waves of humans in front of machine guns. The war is stupid, run mostly by stupid generals and stupid politicians. We can't seem to figure things out. A lot of people lose their faith in humanity because of World War I. I think that was contributing, but I actually think we consumerized our whole worlds. So my whole quest starts 20 years ago when I realized I didn't like the word consumer. When I was a tech industry analyst, I estimate that I probably heard 4,000 startup pitches in the 12 years that I did that as a job. And I followed that word for 20 years. And it gifted me the idea that we've consumerized every sector of society, not just consumer goods, right? So soap, toothpaste, whatever, but we consumerized our educational system, our governance system. The reason elected officials, when they're campaigning for election, want a lot of our money is that they're going to pour it into the television system and now online and on our phones, because they want to buy ads that tell us how to vote. Our culture has been consumerized. Fine art now has a market where art fetches really high. Art used to be a part of culture. Art, there are many cultures still alive today that marvel at our ability to price art and do such strange things with it. Our very identities were consumerized. Whether you think you're beautiful or not, or worthy or not, or good or not, is partly determined by what media you watch and what you're listening to and what other people tell you about. Our homes are no longer just homes. I have shelter on the lower left there. Our homes, in fact, are retirement accounts. And if you change your home, if you personalize it too much, it won't resell and you're damaging your future economically. Our food, health, we consumerized everything. And in doing so, one of the big things we broke was trust. We shattered trust. We use the metaphor of the fabric of society because all those little threads are the interdependencies between us, because we know that Mrs. Coburn down the block is getting a little elderly and it just snowed, so maybe we should go shovel her sidewalk or check in with her to make sure she has enough food for the next few days. All those little things were why we use the metaphor of the fabric of society. And in consumerism, my job is to buy more stuff and make myself happy, and really for me to buy stuff as well as my neighbor to buy stuff. Sharing economy destroys this. It says, maybe the neighborhood only needs 2 lawnmowers instead of 20, for example, or 1 power drill instead of 10. So trust was really destroyed by the consumerization of every sector of our lives. Unfortunately, keeping trust broken serves a lot of interests. Politicians who are trying to spin us into a particular corner really love this. Businesses that are trying to protect golden geese because Wall Street basically reinforces their short-term results are trying to preserve it. So a lot of reasons, a lot of people, a lot of large entities, is actually more important because they're large and powerful entities, care about preserving this breaking trust. The good news is there are cool people around the world who are rediscovering trust and putting it back to work. And I don't mean the people who are building trustless platforms like blockchain and Bitcoin. I don't mean the people who are putting cameras on everything and tracking our every key click in what some people call surveillance capitalism or the stalker economy. I don't even mean the people, and I kind of come out of this community a little bit, the people who are inventing smarter systems that will maybe solve some of our problems. And it's not that I have no faith in any of these things. It's that the moral rudder on all of these is flimsy, if not missing. And there are some good people trying to sort of reattach some kind of rudder to figure out what's going on here. But in general, our awareness of what we've done with technology really lags our implementation of said technologies, and it changes our world. These things rip through our world, right? No, what I mean is actually people who've rediscovered the commons, who are telling us what commons are and how to mind them. People who are releasing the genius that is present in people when people gather together. People who are working from a really simple premise that we are more trustworthy than we think we are. And I was at South by Southwest many years ago and watched Jimmy Wales, the founder of Wikipedia, interview Craig Newmark, the founder of Craigslist. And it was a 90-minute interview, really fun. And during those 90 minutes, both of them said this statement roughly. They said, you know what? People are more trustworthy than we think they are. And I think this is really noteworthy. It doesn't mean that there aren't bad actors. It means that in general, people would like to help. So the question that's become my mantra for the last 5, 10 years is this one: what if we trusted you? And it's a funny question because the we and the you, if you think about it, is us. Like, we didn't create the system, we inherited it, we were born into it. A lot of things have happened, before us. But you know what? We're complicit in maintaining it in many ways. And we got to figure stuff out. And this question also implies that we don't trust you. And that to me was my biggest aha of the last 20 years, that the systems, the institutions we have around us were designed from mistrust. And the good news is I discovered dozens of systems, of companies, of movements around the world that in fact were what I call designed from trust. That started with the assumption that we're pretty trustworthy. So open source software is owned by foundations. It's not in the old days of the tech industry, which is kind of where I come from. IBM owned its own software and was about to go out of business when they discovered Linux and Apache and implemented it. And then they donated Eclipse, which was software they had written, to the commons, to open source, et cetera, et cetera. So it kind of saved the company. Crowdsourcing. Look, you can open up a question and a lot of people show up from everywhere, some of whom have no credentials. Workplace democracy. The internet is designed from trust. You don't have to go pass your new protocol through some technical committee in order to try using it on the network as you would have in the old phone system. You can just go try something, and once it works, you can propose it to the internet. Policing by consent. The Peel principles that were the foundation of the Metropolitan Police Force in London, which are being now adopted by other cities, reversing some of the warification of policing around the world. That's based on trust. Honor codes, even animal gentling, participatory government, the peer-to-peer world, microfinance. And I don't have time in this conversation to go through this. The gift economy, the sharing economy, all of these things are really based on trust. So I'd like to spend the rest of my time really giving you some practical advice on how to accelerate the shift to trust. How might we actually make this happen faster? Because I think it's a good, which world would you like to live in the future? Do you want to live in one that's broken and full of mistrust? Or do you want to work in one where we actually find our way back into all different kinds of new relationships? So the first thing I recommend you do is try to become trustworthy. You're like, oh, I've got that. I know how to do that. I've gone through personal development, and I know about integrity and meeting your commitments. And I'm like, well, that's really good. I think that's excellent stuff. It's stuff that I struggle with every day, but I'm talking about other sorts of things. I'm talking about companies that say, trust me, 9 out of 10 doctors recommend my product, instead of actually behaving in trustworthy ways. So, for example, a very, very simple thing is learning to do gestures of trust. What is we shake hands with each other because it shows that I don't have a weapon in my hand, or we wave. It's an early social gesture of trust, but there are many other kinds. In fact, as you get deeper into it, there's a word that scares everybody, in particular the lawyers, which is vulnerability. And if you haven't already watched Brene Brown's TEDx talk from 2010, The Power of Vulnerability. Do not pass go, do not collect $200. Please go watch that talk, because she's talking about personal relationships, mostly interpersonal relationships, but it's also all about companies with people and companies with each other. And one of the things that's happening is that there's a really big power shift going on, where power is not going to be completely balanced. It won't be producers over consumers, but in fact, it's going to be more balanced, where people can do many things they couldn't do before. In her book, Daring Greatly, she actually goes into the business angles of this whole quest into vulnerability as the path to authentic connection. Authenticity is another good word here. From Thich Nhat Hanh, I borrow deep listening and loving speech. And if more of us did more of that, I think we would solve a lot of our problems as well. Openness and transparency. I mean, the more obvious ways of becoming trustworthy are showing what you do and how you do it. Most companies are busy mining the commons. They sequester a piece of the commons and they, absorb it all, whether it's the aquifer or something else. What if companies minded their commons and learned what that meant and how to do it? And then a lot of companies have skeletons in their closets that cause us to know why they're not trustworthy. Also governments. So air those skeletons. Confess that something happened, try to remedy it, try to make it better. But a lot of companies can't open the doors and ventilate because they know that there's a lot of things that they've done that they're not that proud of, although they probably led to a lot of profits. So The second step is learn how you break trust in ways you don't know you're breaking trust. So these are things that are happening, that are actually taking place, but you don't know they're taking place. So for example, everybody who's in advertising, brace yourself for a second. The language of advertising is the language of a military campaign. You launch ad campaigns. You send flights of messages, which might as well be missiles, against target demographics. You're trying to achieve market penetration. You pay bounties for hot leads. You like captive markets. The whole thing, people came out of World War II and they went into Madison Avenue, for example, and they're like, oh, I know how this works. Look. And at the time, media was one way. It was broadcast only or the telephone. Now that's not true. So I recommend focusing on the word consumer a little bit and thinking about what are the implications of treating all of us as mere consumers. And that might sort of open up some of those ideas. In education, and I could talk for an afternoon just about this one slide. There's something called the hidden curriculum of schooling, which is what we're actually teaching you, even though we're nominally teaching you. The explicit curriculum, which is right now you're in math class, or you're in German class, or you're in history class. Actually, there's a whole lot of things about the setup of the institution and the norms around it and the cultural assumptions that are the hidden curriculum. So for example, if I'm your teacher, I'm your God. Like in class, what I say goes. I can put a blemish on your record that will make sure you don't get into that great college you and your parents, mostly maybe your parents, are aiming for. When the bell rings, doesn't matter to me how deeply you were into the flow of your activity. I want you to put down your pencil and go to the next class. You can't be trusted to be alone any place. You need a hall pass, you need a note from your doctor, you need a chaperone, a monitor, this or that. We can't trust you to actually ever be alone. There's a whole series of these that make up the hidden curriculum of schooling. If you want to learn more about it, Google the word unschooling and go look around there. But institutions that are trying to help us learn have become bureaucracies of education that feature, unfortunately, this hidden curriculum of schooling. And then corporate policy manuals that sort of account for and detail down to the last T who does what when, give people sort of no freedom. Look at things like workplace democracy, or go look at Netflix's corporate policy, which mostly consists of the sentence, do what is in the best interest of Netflix. I've just shown you 3. There are many, many, many others. There's overprotecting intellectual property. The copyright on corporate works right now is 95 years after the death of the author instead of 14 years after the publication of the work from the Statute of Anne in 1710. Craziness. Corporate profits. Draining the commons. Are you listening, Nestle and Monsanto? Basically owning all of some asset and sequestering it from the world and suing people or blocking people from trying to get it back or use it. Everything else that I pointed to in the things suck panel way up front earlier is or at least half the things are sort of possibilities here. I call a lot of these things the hidden architectures of mistrust, that we don't really see them. There's architectures of mistrust like fences with barbed wire on them. That's visible. But again, there's hidden architectures of mistrust that we don't notice. And I did a talk in 2014 for the AIGA. It was their business conference that I recommend, and that little icon there will actually lead you to it. I'll send you the link to this Prezi in the comments after this presentation. So then the next good thing is to learn what commons you affect. And here we've lost the language of the commons. As I said, we used to know how to live on commons. And as you grew up, you understood what to do, what not to do, what helped your village or your town improve. And there are traditional commons like forests and clean water and fisheries and fertile soil. Modern commons like public safety, roadways, airwaves, and museums, culture, things like that. And now with the online world, we have new commons: information, the internet, open source software, the creative commons, where people are putting works out there for other people to use and remix. These are all commons, and your company probably touches many, many, many of these. And this is by far not an exhaustive list. So just get wise on what commons you affect and how. And then in order to design from trust and become trustworthy, you're probably going to have to shake off some corporate shackles. One of them is Wall Street, or whatever market, whatever financial market you're staring at, that has caused executives to have this extremely high compensation, that causes most people to have very, very short-term perspectives on what's going on in the world. You need to shake loose a little bit from Wall Street. Second, consider becoming some form of public benefit corporation. And there are many different kinds of it. Notably, Paul Pullman, the CEO of Unilever, is trying to get Unilever to become a B corporation. That is super interesting, and I'm unclear that he's going to be able to do it within his tenure. But if they could, a public benefit corporation is still a for-profit entity, but doesn't have profit maximization as its goal. It's allowed to have a social mission and live up to that social mission. So what if we made room for people to actually do things that are meaningful and like protecting their commons? Another thing you could try to do is trust your employees. You probably can't move very far because bonus programs and corporate policy manuals and other things have basically broken your trust with your employees. So experiment with that. Think about forms of radical transparency. How might you put information forward that normally you've thought of as, if anybody ever saw this, we would all die, our company would crater. And then learn to design from trust. And I don't have time to dive deep into it, but I'll say that design from trust is sometimes very counterintuitive. It's uncomfortable because we're coming at this with a modernist capitalist lens. Most of us, not all of us, but most of us take for granted a series of things that when you see these systems that are designed from trust, they look weird. So as I talk about this, imagine Wikipedia in your head. So if somebody had told you, hey, I'm going to build a free encyclopedia for the world that'll be in most of the world's languages, that'll be run mostly by volunteers with some donations, and don't worry, it's all going to work out, you would have said, you're crazy. And yet there it is. Wikipedia, they joke, is one of those things that works in practice, just not in theory. A lot of design from trust feels dangerous or impossible. Traffic calming is one of the movements I point to, and it's about the thoughtful redesign of streets and intersections, usually removing stoplights and all those things that we think of as the safety measures and the enforcement measures, the explicit architectures of mistrust that we think work. And in fact, when you do this redesign, the accident rate at these intersections goes down because people have to slow down and make eye contact. They have to make human contact. And here, small aside, I think robo-cars are coming, self-driving cars are coming sooner than we think. And how do you make eye contact with a self-driving car? You don't. So algorithms are probably going to take over traffic calming. Design from trust is not naive. People, trust me, Wikipedians know that there are 14-year-old boys whose hobby it is to go replace, some interesting page with something a lot more tittillating. So Wikipedians are not naive, nor are other members of this. It's just that they understand, they start from good faith, and they know that with careful design, they can actually create a system that will work. Now, it won't always work. There's there's a few bad experiments that make the news, but these systems don't always work. But you know what? Design for mistrust hasn't worked all that well for us either, has it? Go look at the results of our school system. I mean, looking here from an American perspective, but boy, the more money and energy, and the more we say we extend the school day, we take away the summer vacation, we make more homework, whatever, the more we turn the volume to 11, the lower our grades seem to go. So designing from trust actually works well and often is cheaper than designing for control. That when you have to pay for surveillance cameras, and then you have to save all the videos, and then you have to have people watch the videos, and then you have to enforce with police or courts or lawyers, and then you have to, et cetera, et cetera. What if you were building or doing something where you shared the asset and you were building it together? That's sort of a pragmatic avoidance of a negative thing, but really the beautiful positive thing is that when you trust people, they show up with their full selves, they show up with their genius, and really lovely things happen from that point. So I would say learn to design from trust, and let's see where that goes. So, and this is the end of my presentation. So everything does need to be redesigned from trust. And if you're looking through the right lens, if you can see the hidden architectures of mistrust, if you can see the places where we're betraying you without knowing that we're doing so, because everybody does it, because we've done it that way for years, and we can fix that, I think we can actually fix a lot of the problems that are out there. The things suck people might actually be a lot better off in the future. So this all revolves around trust, and I will now switch into Q&A mode so I can see the chat.
Thanks, Jerry. That was very interesting. Myself slightly double.
And
just a few
you know what?
glitches
I'm
for
going to turn
the double.
it entirely, and I will take off screen sharing, and then you can
Okay,
here,
yeah.
and
Seamless.
we can use the central video, and then we're good.
Yes, that works great. That was extremely interesting. We have a couple questions. I have a couple questions myself. I thought that was very comprehensive. We learned a lot about consumer economy is in its death throes, and that we're moving towards, I think you also call it relationship economy, if I'm not wrong, hidden architecture of mistrust, and that we need new social contracts, which could be trust. That's why I take away from this for so far. And Emily and Becky have been asking some questions, so I'll just shoot them over to you. And we can just see where the conversation takes us. And if there's some more questions coming in, please post them on the website. Keep on going. We still have a couple of minutes to go.
Perfect. And so why don't I answer the questions from Becky and Emily?
Yeah, so basically, oh, you've seen them already. Yeah.
Yes, I can see them. So why don't I paraphrase them?
Yeah, so basically, I'll just ask them to you, so that our audience knows. Is it not a problem that we can't measure trust, and how do we integrate it in our business and design?
So it's funny. The Net Promoter Score is an attempt to distill trust into one number, and that some people who are listening will be familiar with it. Other people, you can search for Net Promoter Score or NPS, and companies are trying to figure out what one measure can we use so that we can measure trust in some way. And I think evaluating trust is super important, but trust is really an intangible. It's an evanescent thing. It's hard to earn, easy to lose, and so you also get what you measure, and everybody in business is so focused on KPIs and measurement, key performance indicators, that can actually destroy all the moments where you're trying to create trust. Part of what happens is, long ago, the Omidyar network had a really pioneering online community that was interesting. The only problem was, when you joined, they gave you a bucket of basically internal currency to assign to other people. So you could give somebody 5 of their units if you liked what they posted. But that number, whatever you had collected, followed your name everywhere in the community. So it was kind of a measure of what goodness you had done in the community. So I would be Jerry Michalski with parentheses, whatever. I bounced out of that community very quickly because I couldn't stand it. It made it feel like I was busy performing for points in some weird way, because the points were so visibly right there next to my name. Right. So I think that measurement is useful and interesting, but sometimes really problematic when we're talking about these lovely social intangibles. And also, when you create one target measure, everybody starts aiming for that, and you sometimes create unintended consequences around the rest of it.
So you already measure, going back to the question, I think you answered the first part, but what's really interesting is that the business and design part of things, so making it a bit more practical, you touch points on B corporations. Is this the only way to do it as from a management perspective?
So integrating this into business and design is super interesting, and I apologize that I didn't address that in the.
No, it's a big topic. That's why I think it's good for a whole new question.
And the questions that are showing up are terrific. I really appreciate them.
Yeah.
So it's funny. Trust is one of those things you can't just incorporate by launching a new product, right? Like if I said, oh, we've got 10 products and now we're going to launch an 11th, which is all about trust, you're being like, that is just BS. Trust is one of these things that infects the entire organization and needs to change it. So part of the reason I talked about learn what commons you affect, expose whatever skeletons are in the closet, bring those out, learn to trust your employees. Part of the reason I enumerated a lot of things to do in the latter part of the presentation was that those are practical things that companies can actually go do. Then they can start to look around and do this thing I call design from trust, which involves looking at some system, some ecosystem, or some other kind of system that they're interested in affecting, whether it's learning or being fit or eating, good food, whatever it might be. And then they can begin to see the forces that are actually in that place, how organizations or legislation or other things are blocking where those forces want to go, and how to redesign at I think, a higher level than design thinking. I'm a big fan of a very popular design thing called design thinking. I'm a big fan of it. I love observation. I love empathy. I love prototyping, which are central to design thinking. But design thinking, unless you have a brilliant leader, takes you right down to current behavior and what's happening right now on the ground with somebody. It makes you go look, but it's seldom that I've seen design thinking crack open the hidden architectures that are involved in the situation and the larger issues at stake, which, if redesigned, completely rethink what that industry or set of industries used to be doing. So I think that this cascades back into organizations, and I'm busy now evolving. What does a practice look like called design from trust? And the things that I enumerated were parts of that practice.
So I'm assuming it's a very long-term process that you're going through, because there was a couple of key things you mentioned is authenticity and vulnerability, openness, transparency. So I guess if we would talk about the banking system or financial system, we would probably take a couple of years, if not decades, to rebuild that, sort of trust in an industry, in an entire industry or branch.
Yeah. So on the one hand, yes, this is long-term change and it's long-term thinking. On the other hand, you could do things tomorrow that would absolutely change the tenor, tone, and nature of your activities and would start leading you right into productive things that would make you more trustworthy. I mean, the funny thing is that this feels like such a big thing. It's going to take a long time. Let's not bother. I'm not going to be in this job for that long. And I'm going to have to tell people bad news in order to start doing this. So let's just pass. What I think is that you can actually get started immediately, and the change may take a while to sort of cascade and trickle through. But I think in a world where the ante for everyone is a Uber-style experience where I climb in, I push a button, a car shows up, I climb in, I leave, I say goodbye. Later, I do something and we're done. We're going to have that. That's going to be just table stakes for every industry. The trust, and in a world of global trust implosion, the trustworthy players, the ones we actually know are trustworthy, will rise above. So weirdly, in this moment of deep global mistrust, it's a better opportunity than usual to adopt trust-based strategies.
I'm loving the global trust implosion.
Yep.
I think we should all take that away for the weekend. I'll crack on with the other questions so that we can get as many covered. So from Emily, because she might have missed the beginning part of this, how do you actually define trust? It's very interesting too, and I would love to hear it as well. What is it that the dictionary says to what we intuitively connect with it?
Yeah. Trust basically comes around the confidence that someone or something is going to perform according to my expectations of them. So when they fulfill those expectations, then I know that I can trust them. It's funny because trust is not necessarily a positive virtue all the time. For example, I trust that Dr. Evil is always going to try to kill Austin Powers, and I trust that he's always going to screw it up, and I trust that that Austin is always going to escape so that he can go on to his next hijinks. Right? So sometimes you can trust your opponent, and in competitive markets, this is really, really interesting because you can, if you read your opponents properly, there's a high degree of trust going on there, right? So trust is interesting, and then the definitions tend to be around sort of the performance of duties according to someone's expectations.
Yeah. I must say, the more you spoke about systems as well, I think because trust is everywhere, not just in our economy, but in our daily lives, within our family or our friends, it's such a systemic or ecosystemic thing to consider in about everything. You can't just even pin it down to one definition. It's just something that you feel or that is there, that is like air.
Trust is one of those things that we think we know. And once you start asking a couple questions, very, very, very few people I meet have thought about it deeply. And when you find somebody who has, it's really exciting because then you can have a great conversation that opens up and elaborates some of these corners because it's such a big issue. But everybody assumes that they know a lot about trust, and few people do.
Yeah, I think it's important to put it into words. And as you did, actually link it to a couple of very pragmatic points that we see in terms of change, and that we need to see in terms of change to feed or continue within our society for the future. What drew you to the topic of trust? That's a question that we get from social media channels. Why have you started with trust, coming from an MBA background and being an economist, if I'm not wrong?
I have an undergraduate in economics, mostly in econometrics, which these days I refer to as how to lie with numbers. Because in econometrics, I learned that if you give me a data set, I can create assumptions and cherry pick the data and tell you any story you want. So it kind of taught me how to look behind presentations of numbers and be a little skeptical. It's a really good question. Thank you. And I don't think I read a good history book until I was 35 years old, and I'm well past 35 now. And it was an eye opener when I started. And the first good history book was recommended to me by a controversial New York high school teacher named John Taylor Gatto, and he recommended I read Tragedy and Hope by Carol Quigley, and which is all about how the world financial system showed up between 1900 and 1966 when the book is published. And it's a lot about the behind the scenes machinations of who was doing what to whom and who was leaning on whom and why did the Great Depression get stuck for so long, all those things. I don't remember that many of the details, but then I realized, oh, this is what good history smells like. And I started then hunting down many, many more history books. And I realized, you know, and I think I had read Howard Zinn's book, The People's History of America, before that, which is brilliant. I mean, all Howard Zinn does is he writes a history from the perspective of the people that got trampled by that history. That's all he does. He says, let's go take the perspective of women, of children, of slaves, of Native Americans, and let's write out what does America look like from their point of view. And you realize very quickly how much trust has been violated everywhere. And then somewhere, and I don't remember what caused this because it was so long ago, it dawned on me like, oh my God, advertising is violence. Like the people practicing it don't think they're being violent. They know that they're being annoying, right? But advertising has attracted all the great writers and creative illustrators and artists of our time, because if you're not going to do the great American novel, that's kind of where you gravitate. That's the business that can employ you and you can put your talents to work with some misgivings, right? So I think all those realizations, and then I'm too curious about everything. I do recommend people go visit my brain online, which we haven't mentioned yet. I didn't put it in the presentation. But one of the 4,000 startups that pitched me in the dozen years I was a tech analyst had a product called The Brain. They're based in Los Angeles, and you can go to jerrysbrain.com and browse my brain for free. So all the books, all the people, all the ideas that I've mentioned are actually in context there in a mind map. And that one mind map that you'll look at is the same mind map that I started using 20 years ago, meaning I have one concept map with 20 years of everything I've cared about in place together in context.
And how do you put that context into our current era of mistrust, and especially when we consider Trump and Brexit?
Well, it's fascinating to me because the apex predator of consumer mass market capitalism is currently the president of the United States, right? And how did he win? Well, in retrospect, he's been thinking of running for the presidency for a really long time. Go look on YouTube and find old videos of him. He's been wondering when and how. Go look at The Apprentice and Celebrity Apprentice in light of a run for the presidency. How do you convince a lot of people you're a genius businessman? You run a long-standing reality TV show that tells everybody you're a genius businessman, right? It's kind of crazy. And so, and Brexit has its own complexities. We're in a world now where we're hyper-connected, and this is one of the issues that's bubbling over for Google and Facebook at this very week. There was testimony in front of Congress in the US by these companies. They're being grilled because they hyper-connected everybody at no cost. The cost is sort of lateral, it's peripheral, it's hidden. We're going to sell off your data. We're going to hoover up everything and then sell this off. And then worse, people are going to be able to come in who we're not going to vet or identify, and they're going to be able to create ads we're not going to check on and run them against everybody. And we're going to give them really sophisticated analytic tools to narrow down who they're focusing on and how they do it. And guess what? A whole bunch of parties went and did that, right? So we're in a world where we have low trust. We're at the global trust implosion. We're not even at the nadir. Things could get a lot worse. I trust that you're who you are and that the people listening here have good intentions. Like, this could break down. I can see that happening. That's not an unthinkable scenario from this moment where we are now. So it could be worse. But at this moment, we need to figure out how to link back together, how to create these little mycelial networks of trust, including people who have opposite opinions from ours. What can we do together that will build trust? I think fear, unfamiliarity breeds fear, and familiarity begins to distill that fear, begins to weaken that fear as we go.
Very interesting. I am still actually, because you referred back to Google and Apple, I remember in your slides you had burgers as an icon for them. I was a bit startled at that, but I also thought that was quite special actually to see in relation to that.
There was a little meme around in the last week of the new emoji and how, like, wait, this emoji is wrong. The cheese has to go above the burger and the lettuce goes below the burger because it keeps the bun, from getting soggy.
Yeah.
So there was a protracted, explanation and fight about that online.
Yeah, I think you can start a whole new conversation or maybe even diff session around that. I think we might have to slowly wrap it up. I mean, I think we could continue on this as I discovered that trust, because my initial question was, as you mentioned, Kate Rayworth and a couple of other solutions and game changers that they have a story to tell, a story of change, a new type of economics. I think they all have in common that they tell a story, but maybe trust is actually what builds the foundation of what they're saying. And I think that you really made a great point and great way of us to rethinking this part, which is essential for anything that we're going to do, even at the diff potentially.
Yeah. So we're all looking for a simple way to explain what the change is and what's going on. I think all of us, when I said, look, here's a whole bunch of really smart people who have presented a series of different ideas for how to fix the world. All of us are busy trying to figure out a simple explanation and some litmus test. And for me, the litmus test became, is this system treating me as a consumer or as a whole human? And you can kind of tell that difference. Like a consumer's job is to go buy stuff and to shut up and not be so pesky and ask for good labeling laws or make the thing yourself or share it out. Just buy more things. And by the way, if you don't keep buying more things, our economy will falter and fail, and then we're all going to be doomed. So just be quiet and be a good consumer. Like when 9/11 happens, George W. Bush's answer to America is go shopping. So I think that litmus test helps us assess one thing after the other, but then the vision I presented says you need to learn how to read the hidden architectures of mistrust, which is counterintuitive and might be mystifying. So I'm at the point now where, how do I make that clearer, right? If we're going to go in and start to understand these things and we would like to fix our institutions and our companies and our social relations in these ways, one way is to just go talk to all the examples I showed. Go do some participatory governance. Go do some microloans. Go edit the Wikipedia. Go participate in any of these.
Yeah,
that'll get.
I agree. I think there's a lot of ways to already engage in a trustworthy environment, which gets us away from worrying too much about the gloomy and doomy part that we see in Trump and Brexit eras, or this era happening at the moment. So breaking the consumer cycle, getting back to being a citizen, full human, trusting into other humans. That's the only way, I guess, that the economy will work. And to accelerate that notion of trust within our economy, I think I'm going to take that as the end note for this fantastic session with you, Jerry. Thanks very much for all the great questions from everyone, and keep them coming. I think Jerry is going to be happy to provide you with more input on all of his websites, blogs, and his further events that are all coming up. Thanks very much for that, Jerry.
Thank you.
And I hope you have all a lovely weekend. Check out some more nice sessions coming up on Monday. We're returning bright and early, 10 a.m. GMT, Grill the Circular Geeks, 11 GMT, putting the economy into circular education. More education topics coming up and other topics that are trustworthy to watch. With that, I'm finishing off, and thank you very much. Goodbye.